Good afternoon and welcome to a rather obviously titled segment. A segment specially designed to showcase the backstories of individuals who have made an impact. And during this hour, we will delve into a conversation around stories that need to be told of modern day icons. Luminary Learning Solutions crafted this segment so you, our audience, can be inspired to truly thrive. Well, I'm Anton Thayalan, the Chief Evangelist and co-host this hour. Joining me is our founder and destiny architect, Vidusha Nathavitharana, the host for this afternoon. And together, we will take you through an hour of free-flowing discussion. For today's segment on In Conversation With, it is my privilege to introduce Allison Summers, a global business leader. She's the host of the podcast Disruptive CEO Nation, an author and speaker, President, American Marketing Association in Chicago. She's a champion for nonprofits and women in business. Amongst other things, she is also board member for 9 organizations. She's been a managing director, an executive director, chief staff officer roles in global corporates and nonprofits. She's been an executive director for over a 30-member organization focused on empowering women in 67 countries with representation at United Nations meetings and commissions on status for women. On that note, my pleasure to welcome Allison. Hi, Allison, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me today.
An absolute pleasure, Allison. Just before we kind of dive in to modern day and your current role, and to set context, and as I always ask, and we're very keen to find out, the Allison Summers before the Allison Summer that we have today. I know you're behind nonprofits, you're behind advocacy for women, you run the Disruptive CEO Nation. But before all of that began, tell us a little bit about who Allison Summer was growing up.
Well, it depends on how long you want the story or how short you want the story. So when I
take us back to childhood.
What?
Take us back to your childhood.
There you go. So I always say when I was little, my dad came home from the Vietnam War, and he was a barber, and my mom had 2 children, and we essentially had nothing, like nothing. We lived on my father's barber paycheck, and we, had, it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but we had, powdered milk because we couldn't afford milk. We had meat if we were lucky twice a week. Like my mom was a master at taking a piece of meat that who knows what it was and then making it into like casseroles for the next week. And so, I grew up watching my parents struggle, but I also grew up watching my dad constantly reinvent himself. So he went from being a barber to being an assistant retail store manager to being a wine salesman, to being a realtor, to being an investment broker, to like just constantly reinventing himself. And he was very much a people person. He's one of those strange people that you hear about that has like charisma, and like they walk in the room and you know who they are, but you don't know why you know who they are. And so I think that was quite influential. One, just the contrast. And my dad didn't like get to his peak when I was a kid. We were still quite struggling. No one in the family had ever gone to college. My parents, when we were in high school, both went to part-time college. And my sister and I were the first to actually have the opportunity to go to university. So that's just a little bit about the childhood. Born in Chicago, grew up in Chicago and outside of Chicago. I'm very much a Chicagoan. You can hear it in my accent. It comes through. But yeah, it was a very kind of humble beginning, and a beginning that I guess, kind of made me always want more in life and be willing to strive for more.
I do want to ask this question, and forgive me for asking it. And I do ask this of a lot of people who had similar stories to share. That kind of defines you, doesn't it? I know childhood doesn't define you in that sense, but that drive, that wanting more, that also that knowing that this is what life can be makes you want more, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was propelled by two things. You know, if anybody's grown up in a family where you've had a parent that was in a war, right, that comes home with post-traumatic stress disorder, and so there's a lot of you know, disruption. Even, I don't want to say violence, because it wasn't that kind of household, but you know, a lot of stress and strain. So I think it was propelled by two ways. One, I was propelled by wanting to leave that family situation. I mean, who wants to live when, you know, you're not sure you got enough money for groceries, or you go to the grocery store and you realize you got to put things back because you don't have enough money to pay for it. And then just, you know, it was a tough kind of environment. So I think I was propelled twofold, but also having a mother that had children at a very, very young age who always wanted to go to college and couldn't. We had a mother who was constantly saying, you can do more with your time. You can do, like, even when it came to our free time, and you know, we wanted to be a cheerleader, a pom-pom, and my mother would be like, you could do better things with your time. So I was editor of the paper. And so I think it's twofold. It's one, wanting to push behind you where you were, as well as wanting to pull towards you this future that you don't yet have.
And what kind of did that kind of push you to start work early, or kind of start looking out for work and employment early enough, or did you want to educate yourself because you thought that was the way out of the situation you were in?
So it's funny. My first job, I was 15, and my sister, who was 17, we cleaned the church on Saturdays, and I don't remember much about cleaning the church, but I remember we would argue over who had to put all the hymnals out on the chairs, because that was just like such a boring task to lug the books and stick them all out on the chairs. So yeah, there was a lot of part-time jobs. I worked at a dentist office as a receptionist. I worked at the pizza counter taking pizza orders. I was a maid cleaning houses at times. I can't think of others, but I had lots of eclectic part-time jobs, and even all the way through school, all the way through university, I always had 3 part-time jobs, because it was when you you learn that self-sufficiency when somebody is not giving you a handout. You know, I had a car that I drove in college that had rust in it, so that there was like a spot where you could see through the floor and see the road. And I totally forgot about that part. But yeah, it taught you a lot of, oh, you think this is bad? This isn't bad. This is easy. Let's go to the next thing.
The first real break, where did that come from?
So I got a teaching degree, a degree in professional education, and I taught for a few years. I actually went to college in Tulsa, Oklahoma, very different world than Chicago, and then I ended up moving to Detroit, Michigan, and in Detroit, I couldn't get a teaching job, and I fell into a temporary job. So I was a temporary employee at a very large experiential marketing agency that specialized in the automotive market. And they specialized in trade shows, national dealer announcements, product launches for new cars, like very experiential, very all the event industry. And I started as a temporary employee filling in for somebody's maternity leave. And that was my absolute big break. I didn't know that I wanted to be a business person. You know, if I describe like what my father did growing up, you know, he worked in retail, he worked as for a wine distributor, he was selling real estate. Those were the things he was doing before I left the home. And I didn't really know what business was. And so I got this job as a temporary employee, learning how to work with databases. But I was that kind of person who would sit back and go, look at those men. Those men are bringing their golf clubs to work and going out for these long lunches and have those fancy offices. Like, what do they know that I don't know? Like, what is it that makes them different, and how do I get there? And so for me, the big break was I got this job and I got a boss who believed in me. And I think for a lot of us, it's that first, we talk about the difference between mentors and sponsors. So like a mentor is going to say, here, this is nice. This is what you should do. This is what you should study, or here's my advice. Whereas a sponsor is somebody that's going to take you by the hand and take you into the meeting room, who's going to take you by the hand and tell you exactly what you're doing wrong. Because a lot of times, no matter how much knowledge we have up here, it's the other things that we're doing wrong that block our career progression. And so he sponsored me, meaning he would take me to meetings. And this was in the 90s in Detroit. It was still very in the US, good old boy network. But he would introduce me to people. So that's why I said he would sponsor me to people. And then if I didn't meet the expectations, you know, he would chew me out. But I'm just so blessed and grateful that I wasn't offended by it, that I was like, again, he knows something I don't know. So whatever he tells me, I need to know, because I want that corner office job someday.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in a bit before. I know Vidusha has a string of questions. I'm sure it's already, I can see the cogwheels turning there. Allison, so I understand the break that you got, right? And you had a sponsor, and both Vidusha and myself can kind of relate to that. Mm-hmm. We've certainly had our share of sponsors, you know, who've been able to tell us straight on the face where we are going wrong, what we need to do differently. When you got your exposure to corporate life, your first bit, did you see yourself being where you are today? I mean, how did you take all of that, you know, the feedback, the corrections, being told you're not doing it right, or being, you know, if you've got a creative idea, or if you've got some thoughts and being told that's not the way to do it. But how did you react to that? And did you see yourself becoming from where you were cleaning churches, taking you back then to being on even managing director, and then director on a number of companies globally?
No, absolutely not. I think at first, so I'm going to give you twofold, because there was another major jump for me that drove me to chase. I'm going to say that changed it from just like I want that to I'm counting the money. Like my focus is on the money. But let me go to the first part of what you asked, is how you take feedback. So this sponsor, I've got two stories for you from this sponsor. Is one, he said to me one day, he goes, Allison, and this was again the 90s. So I would wear these skin tight sweater dresses, and I was quite young, and I was told I was a distraction when I walked through the office. So I had this boss who said, Allison, you need to get a suit. And I took him very seriously, and I went and got a suit. And so here I go, I walk in his office, and I think he's going to praise me because I got the world's best suit. But it was so wrong. I went and I bought a purple suit, purple, with a gold lame blouse and spiked purple suede heels. And I'm thinking, I am such the businesswoman. I am such the businesswoman. And I walk in his office, and he's like reading papers, and he just looks up and looks at me, and he just goes, Navy. I think your next suit needs to be navy. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then there was another time where he took me to a meeting with Chrysler, and we are on the second floor walking down to the first floor, and he was walking before me, and he turns around in the middle of the staircase, and he like takes his finger, and he doesn't touch me, but he's just like this, and he's like, if you don't learn how to shake hands, I am never taking you to another meeting ever again. And but yet he was also very generous in other ways in teaching me how to use databases and how to work with the programmers to change things in the database, and how to, you know, rather than putting a memo in the inner office mail envelope, he would let me take memos direct to the executive leaders so that the executive leaders could at least see me visually and say hello, versus sticking things in inner office mail. So anyway, so I don't know how, I just took the sponsor's advice because I believe that sponsor was trying to get me where I needed to be, and I did with him. I actually worked at 3 different office locations with this sponsor, and got to my first senior manager title from a temporary worker up to a senior manager. So my advice to anybody that would be listening is sometimes if it doesn't make sense to you, if you trust the person, you've got to follow along. And I wish somebody would give that advice to my employees sometimes today, because they don't always understand where I'm coming from as, you know, the person sitting in the corner office, but they need to trust me. And then my next big leap that pulled me forward is when I was 27. Part of my story that I have to own is when I was 27, I became a single mother, and then I was responsible for taking care of my family. And I adopted this philosophy that, you know, if you and I are working the same hours in the day, then I need to make more money in those same hours as you. And I think that was my next big leap to driving me to understand more about the financials of the business. And so I parlayed my first director level title when my daughter was 5. I got my first director level title, but it was on me. It wasn't on the company to decide to get me the director level title. And I did what I needed to do, even as a single mother. Like, I went and bought my own fax machine and in my home and would pay for international faxes because it would help propel my career. And I didn't ask for handouts for the company. I just took initiative and did what I needed to do. And that really paid off for me.
Yeah, I do want to ask this because I think it's important and pertinent as well. And especially given the fact that even today, the gender divide is very much a real thing. And when you were progressing in your career ladder, it would have been much more pronounced. What is it like to be in a man's world? And did the gender divide play a significant role?
It did, and it did in those early days, and I think it still does today. And I'll be honest with you, I think if I talk to other women who had a career time frame the same time as me, you know, we knew that we were, you know, how to operate a little bit differently. We knew that things weren't in our favor, so you had to overcome by excellence, and sometimes you had to know when to, I'm going to joke and say play the game right, but you had to overcome by excellence and knowledge. And that was tough because you felt like you always had to have your game on. I had a barrier that they wouldn't let me travel. Women didn't travel for business necessarily. And so I actually had to go to see the first field work, because we had the type of business where our business is in the field. You can only learn so much in the 4 walls of the office. I say this to everybody that I try to train and mentor, right? You can only see so much of the business within the four walls of the office. If your product is out in the field, you have to go out in the field and the customers, and they wouldn't let me go. So I actually used personal vacation time and personal travel money and said, well, I'm going to be on vacation and you're setting up this national dealer announcement. May I go and observe? And so I did. I went for 2 days, observed, and then they reported back that I was helpful and behaved myself, and they could trust me to start going out in the field. So there was things that you had to just kind of accept and work around. Now, I'm not saying that's not true for everybody, because everybody needs to own their business life. Everybody that's serious about getting ahead, whether you're a male or female, needs to own it. I worry about younger women, depending on what country they live on and their environment, because there's a difference. We talk about advocating for women in business. There's a difference between fighting for what you think is right, and then also just owning that, you know, anybody overcomes discrimination by excellence. And that's true whether you're a woman. That's true whether you're an indigenous person or anybody that's discriminated against. You can only overcome those things by owning excellence. And so I think it is a difficult question. Women need to be in pursuit of more, and they should just not have, and you can't have a chip on your shoulder about it. You just need to understand the game that you've been born into and figure out how you're going to outplay that game. And some days you lose and some days you win.
Isn't it unfair though that it is that way? And didn't you get upset about it? Because it is unfair, isn't it, when you have to kind of perform at a exceptionally good level?
No, you're correct, because I'll give you an example. The last job I had before the one I have today, I worked in a very large corporation in downtown Chicago, and I felt that there was a boys network of these MBA, Ivy League school, you know, this network that I couldn't quite crack the code to, and I was very frustrated, and I left. So it's not fair, and sometimes you do have to leave, and it doesn't feel good, but it's, again, I had to own that, and if I couldn't crack the code in that environment, then I needed to go bring my best to someplace else and make that move. And I do have to coach women that way sometimes, that you know, if it's going to be impossible, you need to make your own way and move. And it's not fair, you know, but that's different than like actual harassment cases, actual things that are truly discriminatory in the workplace, when you feel like I'll give you an example. I have a friend who felt, and I agreed, it was not the right situation. But before she could even like fight it, the attorneys she was talking to, you know, they wanted like $4,000 retainers just to take on her case. And so you start to be, and I think this is for women, right? It's the choices that you might have to make to get ahead and to do what you need to do. And so she never pursued the harassment because she just didn't feel like she could have. And so it is unfair. And we've got a long way to go for that, to fix it and overcome it.
Is that one of the reasons why, having been through everything you've been through, was that a motivation to get into the kind of work you do now?
Yeah, so for the last 7.5 years, I have worked in the gender equality space, and we work with different aspects of human rights, but predominantly for women and mothers who are raising children. And I do get very passionate about this space, because you're right. Sometimes there are these great people that have drive, but they don't have the opportunity, and they just need that opportunity to get a leg up, or just to begin to know what it feels like to have money of your own, or to feel like you have an option. And so, yeah, I do get very passionate about the gender equality space. Today is actually, as we're recording this, a very important day, because it's the beginning of Unite to Say No to End Violence Against Women. Every year there's a thing called the 16 Days of Activism by the UN, and many organizations sign on because, you know, you can't, again, I go back and talk about the challenges in the household when I grew up. When you have somebody that has a very violent tendencies, to break those cycles, to think as a woman that that's not normal, that I can have a life that doesn't have that. I can make a new life. And so I do get very passionate about things like women's education. And then a controversial thing that I say, so I'll say it for you all, that people don't always agree with. In the US, as you know, I think everybody knows that the US has these absolutely fabulous things. And then all of a sudden there's these crazy things that you're like, what is going on in that country? And one of the things that we have that's a big problem in the United States is the cost of childcare. If you have 2 children under the age of 5 in full-time daycare, it can cost you, say, $26,000 a year. So a lot of women, once they start having children, feel like they have no choice but to drop out of the workforce. And so I get a little controversial, because I will tell women, I understand that there's going to be a few years where you feel like you're killing yourself to basically break even, right? The money that you're taking in for your paycheck is basically going into your daycare, your wardrobe, your gas, your, you know, all the expenses for working outside of the home. And you'll be like, why am I doing this? And I say, as hard as that is, you're sacrificing your income 10 years down the line and 20 years down the line, because unfortunately, if women leave the workforce to raise their children, it's more difficult for them to come back. And that's a reality that, you know, and I'm not saying that single fathers might not face that same reality, but that's a greater predominant reality for women, is how do I build my career and take care of my kids? And again, as we're recording this message, you know, my kids have been homeschooling since March. Now I'm fortunate my children are a little older now, but I have women that work for me that have 2 or 3 kids at home that they're homeschooling and doing their job. And so there is just a different weight of the world, I think, on women. That's not fair, but again, it's find a support network that will help you, and find a woman who's been further than you in business who can encourage you on. Because if I would have ever dropped out, I wouldn't be where I am today. And again, it's a choice. It's a personal choice. I'm not saying all women need to fully stay in the workforce, but you need to understand the ramifications. It's not a short-term gain.
Interesting comments, Allison. Thank you for that. Just we live in a world where we require, where everyone talks about equality and sing praises when you have a female being promoted to a particular position or a particular role. But in your line, and I know you do quite a bit of executive coaching, and I'm sure you've come across, females in women in senior positions. But what are some of the challenges in trying to get that message across, the one that you talk about, where you need to take your own steps, you need to sort of pave your own way for your career building. You can't wait for things to be just given to you, but you need to go for it, you need to work for it. When you try and get that message across, what are some of the challenges that you have come across?
Well, I think for women, again, blanket statement here, our DNA is wound to be caretakers, and we get so grasped on to caring for things that it's harder for us to make changes. The other thing is recognizing, and I talk about this as I coach and train people, right? Is we all have skills, but we all have skill gaps. We all have personality traits, and we need to know when we overuse skills. So a lot of women stay in jobs too long because of this overusing their caretaking skill. And whereas men just, are wound differently. Again, a very blanket statement. But I love this example of when I decided today I have a 16-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter that are still at home. And about 8 years ago, I can't remember when, maybe it was, I decided that it was time to start giving them a weekly allowance so they could really learn to manage money. And so we made our chore charts. The first day we did it, everybody did what they were supposed to do. And I had $20 that I handed to my daughter, and my daughter was like, Mom, no, I don't need it. This was for the house, this was, and I'm like, no, you need to take this money because you're going to learn to start managing your money. So my son comes up, holds out his hand. I set a $20 bill in it. My son looks at his hand, and he looks at me. He looks at his hand and he looks at me and he goes, I think it was worth more than that. And I think fundamentally for me as a gender equality advocate, I was like, oh, look at that total contrast. And that's what I said. There's beautiful things in both aspects of people. Because quite frankly, I think in the story you would guess who probably did the better cleaning chore job too. But the thing is that women, when we put women, money into households where the head of the household is a woman, more money, you can look at these statistics up, more money stays within the household and goes to educating the children. So there is this beautiful trait about women as being caregivers and providers for the things around them. But they just need to know when they're overusing that skill and it's hurting them and hurting maybe their family in the long term, that they need to put their money into their education, and they need to be a little bit more willing to take on risk. And I think, that's part of it, is we don't talk enough about, people want to talk about limiting beliefs when it comes to women and gender. And sometimes they need to stop that conversation and talk about how we help women know how to take managed risks in their lives and in their career and in their job roles. And so I think that managed risk conversation is very different. And so I don't know if that fully answered that last question, but that's what I've got for you.
No, it does. And I just have a follow-up on that, because I think that conversation is really important to be had when you're growing up as a child, as much as when you hit adulthood. And as I said, my daughter is just right in front of me, and I often wonder whether the kind of conversations we have with them growing up are the kind of conversations that we should be having, because I think, like you very rightly said, there is that instinct that kicks in, and we think it's normal because that's what we would expect. But when they grow up, that does become very much a self-limiting factor, and too much of anything is good for nothing anyway. How do you taper that? Because I think it's instinct, isn't it? It's not something that comes naturally to you. How do you inculcate that from an early age?
Well, I'm going to go back to my child, because I think the one thing that, again, if you look at all of these kind of building pieces that, attach to your DNA, when my dad was the manager of the retail store, we would go in, because my parents couldn't afford daycare. On Saturdays, my mother would go and be the cashier, and my sister and I, and we couldn't have been more than like 6 and 8, we would have to go sit in the storeroom and be hidden and be sure that nobody saw us. But there's this thing about having gone to work with your parents. There's this phrase that says you can't be what you can't see. So, you know, children need exposure to different things to understand the way world works. So when we were kids, they would let us out of the storeroom. I joke because that sounds just so terrible. But we would, I remember being a small child and we'd have the pricing gun where you'd put the stickers. So we would open the boxes and we put the stickers and we put the things on the shelves. And we would do it like after hours or if the store wasn't busy. And so again, being a single woman with a small child, and I was trying to get ahead in business, I would go to work on Saturdays and I would take my baby with me and lay blankets out on the floor and give her all her play stuff and then work at my desk. And then my other children, when they were growing up, I had a job in a high-rise downtown Chicago, and I would take them with me on Saturdays and they would play. I mean, I could only get work done at maybe 1/4 of the pace that I could if I didn't have children with me. But I would work and I would say, we're gonna work this long. We're gonna go take a break, and we'd walk on our break. We'd go outside and walk up and down Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago, and then they'd get something to eat or whatever, and then we'd go back and work again. And so my children have been raised very familiar and understanding of what I do. Now, I've worked in international business for 15 years, so I've done calls all hours of the day. I think you guys have had the opportunity to see my kids pop their head in. So my kids understand that if you want to get ahead, you work hard. And so I think it's beholden on people to give their kids exposure to different things. I have friends who would never let their kids know anything about their money or their financial situation. And we talk about that kind of stuff all the time. The last car I bought, I made my son go sit there with me for 4 hours and actually sit and look at the loan paperwork with me, because he's 16 and he's going to have to figure this stuff out. But I also translate the same thing to my office. I have this in business. I tell Mike things. This is advice I give to my junior staff. Is because it's beholden efficiency, right? Business is about efficiencies. Making money is about efficiencies. And so I tell my staff they have to own when anybody asks them to do something, you know, what do you want from me? What do you want it to look like when I give it to you? What are you going to do with it when I do the work for you? And what's the deadline for the work? And so I always say, look, if you didn't ask as the worker bee these questions, like, what do you need from me? What do you need it to look like? Who are you going to give it to after I give it to you? And when do you need it by? If you haven't done that, you know, and then you're upset because your boss makes you redo work or because your boss didn't give you the deadline, I mean, that's on you. And so I think it's, again, I raise my children to have exposure to more things, but I also raise my staff that work for me to have a greater visibility. I also really get on a high horse that in business, if you're a business owner, like, you should not be ashamed or shy to let your staff know how money is made. Everybody from the front door to the back door of your business needs to understand how the money's made and where the profit comes from. I once worked at a very large corporation, and I was a director level role. I was director of account management, and we got a new general manager who came in, and the business was in Chicago. It's a hard to make margin city. And this new general manager came in and he put 2 pennies in front of each of us, 2 pennies. And he said, do you think it's worth working a whole year so that we can only have 2 pennies of profit? And he goes, those 2 pennies are going to sit on your desk for the next year, and we're going to all worry about profit no matter where we sit. So again, there's just exposure, so people even know what they don't know and what they need to know.
Can I quickly draw a parallel and pass it on to Anton on this? Because I think probably because you were a single mom raising kids, that comes naturally to you to be able to draw those comparisons. Um, how would you do that with if you were a stay-at-home mom?
So when you're a stay-at-home mom, I still think people need to stay busy and figure out how to still dabble in business. You know, the favorite word here is side hustle, or fortunately, you know, we've moved more and more into a gig economy where there are ways for more people to use their skills and talents on a part-time basis. The other thing is I've talked before with both of you gentlemen about volunteerism. And so if you are a woman or a individual who's going to stay home for a period of time, or even when you're in between jobs, you know, do volunteerism, because that will help you with your business skills, and it gives you something to put on your resume or your CV so that people know that you're still an active person, right? That's what most employers want to know and see is, are you still an actively engaged member of society? And so you can take care of your children and still, you know, keep your finger on the pulse and not go completely out. You know, find an internet job, something that you can do for a couple hours a day. If you have a spouse that has come home and can take care of some of the child duties, or have another mother that will trade babysitting favors with you. I know some women do babysitting collaboratives where they have like a ticket system where they're like, okay, everybody starts with 10 hours of babysitting in this collaborative, and then we pass the tickets around to kind of pay each other so that I can get things done when I need to. It's a desire and being willing to not see the barriers, but figure out how you can get something done that seems like you can't. When I coach, I tell people, and even I say this when you network, like I always say, you need to be aware of what you need. And you need to create that gap in your mind of, I have this problem, I need this, I need this, I need this. And if that gap is created in your mind doesn't like strain or stress. So your mind is going to try to work to close that gap. And so if you say, I need this opportunity to figure out how to work part-time, or somebody that needs my services, you have to be willing to speak it into being as well. So tell people in your network, tell anybody that you can that, yes, I'm home with my kids, but these are the things that I can do, and I'm looking to do something for somebody for 5 to 10 hours a week. If you know somebody, think of me, send them my way. Because when you apply for jobs, you don't always have to say that this was just a part-time job or this was just a 10-hour-a-week job. As long as you're getting skills and as long as you're doing work, you know, keep yourself busy and active. I will say that I do have complete compassion for people who have a stop and can't work, because they do need to take care of kids. I do have a child that has a chronic illness. I do understand the strain and stress of when life delivers you things that you can't work around. Just start to get creative and think about what you don't know that you want to know.
Sorry. Thank you, Allison. Just interesting though, I was listening to you, and sometimes you get really caught up in the stories that get told, right? And it's fascinating to see the challenges you've overcome yourself to get to where you are at. And now you sort of impart that knowledge to those who you coach. But in today's organizations, and we see quite a lot of mentoring, quite a lot of succession plannings taking place, and these are all part and parcel of the organizational strategy. But as and then you touched on volunteering, and then I know you're also, an advocate for women. How do organizations build strategies, or what would you suggest for organizations in terms of building strategies to enable women to take on those leadership roles? Considering the fact that it is not easy, we did cover that earlier on. But if organizations were to look at equity, how does that work, and what do they need to consider in terms of strategy?
Great question. Currently, since I work at a women's organization, right, we have to be a leader in this, right? We have to demonstrate what we would want other companies to do. So, and I think it depends on where you go in the world, what people's appetites are for flexibility. So the first thing that we had to do was come up with what were core business hours, and then give everybody flexibility around that. So our core business hours are 9 to 3. So I have people that start work at 7 and are done and out, and I have people that start at 9 and then work the other end. But we have like core hours where we all need to be able to be online together and reachable for each other, or when we can get team meetings. Now, your core hours don't need to be that long, because ours aren't that long anymore today. Today, we have a lot more flexibility with the global environment that we're working in. But, a company needs to figure out what does it absolutely need from its workers. Sometimes there are jobs that you have to be there at the certain time because of the customer facing aspect of the job. The other thing is, it's a really fine line between what an employer can ask of an employee and what an employee feels like telling. Like legally in certain countries and in the US, I can't ask you too much personal information on why you need work flexibility or why you need days off. But I just encourage the workers that the more you're upfront with your employer, there's a trust that builds, and they don't need to know everything about your personal life, but there's a trust that builds. And that should be one of your number one jobs when you go to work, is how am I building trust in the workplace? Because I have people that need flexibility, and I never question when they say they need flexibility, because I trust that when I need them, they will step up. I think companies also need to figure out, can they do more job sharing? Meaning, okay, I have this role, I have this one full-time role, but can I hire 2 part-time people? And not for the sake of paying them less money, and not for the sake of saving on benefits, but, can I have a job share situation where I have, 2 women share a job and they each work it half of the time? Can I do more of that in my company to help this untapped workforce? In the US and other places, I shudder to think how many women are walking around with 4-year university degrees that are intelligent, that are not working. But again, I'm going to also say that they need to figure it out, and even sell themselves to companies. Go to a company and say, I'm not looking for a full-time job. This is my CV. Can I do something for you for this period of time? The worst that companies can do is say no. But, I think as an employer, you just have to figure it out. And you have to understand that we're all part of this civil society, and you need to allow people to have flexibility to raise their families. And again, in my workplace, it's different, but if I need somebody to work and they don't have childcare that day, they bring their kids in the office and they work out of the corner conference room, and the kids are on the floor playing with all their toys, and my employee is still sitting there working on her computer. Now, we don't do that all the time, but it's not unusual if somebody suddenly loses their daycare for a day, they can either take a vacation day or they bring their kids in and they take over the conference room and they do what they can. So I think that's a shift that a lot of companies haven't made, and maybe it wouldn't work in a high-rise corporate office, but can it work in your place of employment?
I'm very conscious of time, but I do have to ask this because I think in this entire equation, there's a lot of work that needs to happen at policy level, isn't it? It can't, and I don't mean statutes or laws and regulations. I just mean within organizations, there is a lot that can be done. It's just that nobody really puts enough time and effort into it. And if policies were a little bit more flexible rather than rigid, and if people were a little bit more understanding rather than not, I think a lot can happen. So what can organizations do, because they're run in certain ways and they're not used to that? Where can organizations who want to make that difference find help?
You know, that's a great question. I will say in different parts of the world, there's a lot more of a greater movement for diversity and inclusion. And I don't know if those efforts are including more flexibility in the workplace. And I don't know. I think the workers are going to make the change. I don't know. Particularly the younger generations that are coming into the workforce, I think they're going to help force this change. So I don't know exactly where to send employers to get assistance in. Are they, I'm just going to call them not gender policies, I'm going to call them family-friendly policies, again, because you know, if you are a male and your spouse has a job too, you're both working, it might be you bringing the kids in and working out of the corner conference room for the day with your children on the floor playing. But I think there are these family-friendly policies. So I don't know where exactly you go. The challenge is, right, unfortunately, and I'm going to talk about, again, a funky thing about the US compared to maybe other parts of the world. The problem isn't that employers don't want to do these things. The problem is insurance. Because my commercial insurance company probably wouldn't love some of what I say because they see it as a greater liability. And my employees know that if they bring their children in, they are responsible for those children. But so I think there's a lot to change. And it's also harder for a manager to manage a flexible work environment because I have to be sure that I'm still treating each employee equitably. So I can't give one person more freedom and rights that I would be giving the other, but yet we both know that employees are completely different. And so to manage this kind of environment is a lot more difficult. So don't have an answer for you. I'll think about that, where you go to understand how to make a more family-friendly work environment, and that your managers are trained for this as well.
Thank you. No, and I have one last question before I hand you over to Anton. But in all of this, having gone through everything you've gone through, is there something that you would say definitively to young women who's joining the workforce? What should they do differently in order to make sure that they're successful?
So, great question. I am a huge proponent of professional trade organizations. So I am a big proponent of, again, you guys said at the beginning, I'm currently president of the American Marketing Association Chicago. It's my second time as president. I did it a decade ago. you need to get connected. So I have a book that I wrote called Connect to Influence, and I wrote it really thinking about my older daughter, who's she's 28. When she entered the workforce, like, there are secrets. There are secrets in business that people don't tell you. I always regret I never finished like an MBA or a master's degree. I started one, didn't finish it because I've been too busy working in business. And so there's a lot of people that say get the formal education, and that formal education is good. But what's really good for anybody entering in business, women, men, whatever, is attach yourself to a professional trade organization that will give you more education and be absolutely forward about networking with people and asking for advice. People like to talk about themselves, and so most people will give you open advice and knowledge that young professionals just don't listen or don't take or don't ask. But yeah, if you are in business today, you can't assume that the business that you work in is going to take care of your continuing education or take care of giving you the opportunities. So you need to go out and network as if the people you meet are going to be the pathway for your next job. You want to give them a good impression, make them feel you're competent. You want to get involved with these trade organizations or online networks. You know, there's a lot of online digital networks that if you don't have the money to pay for a professional trade organization, that you can get involved and connected with people. But, you know, I know people struggle with how to choose where they put their money. I know it's a struggle to say to be a member of this organization is X amount of money. But if somebody could tell you that you know, that $200 a year that you're going to pay for that trade organization is going to get you a new job that's going to pay $5,000 a year more than you make today, like, that's a lottery ticket you would buy. That's a bet you would make. But it's hard because we're all choosing, particularly when you're young in your career and you don't have much money, where you put that money. So look for scholarships for those professional trade organizations. Contact them and say, is there some way to get a sponsored membership? Or just can I volunteer without being a member? But that would be my advice for the young in career is, again, you can't get what you need in the four walls of the place you work. You've got to make it happen outside for yourself. And the more people you know, magic happens.
Thank you for that. Anton, over to you.
Sorry about that, Allison. I was actually going to ask you tell us a little bit about your book, Connect to Influence, and where can people get a copy, and what else is there in that book that makes it stand out? I know we should get a copy soon.
Yeah.
But
it's on Amazon, and it is, I talk about, in it, there's like a speed up principle, how you can speed up your success by networking. I talk about collecting people in the, nice to know, like in the moment, in the maybe, and in the must. So when you network, is this person just in the moment, meaning you're nice to talk to, I'm enjoying this, but you're just in the moment, I don't really see how you're going to fit. In the maybe, so maybe I'll spend more time talking to you, I'll connect with you on LinkedIn or in some other way. And then there's those people you meet that are in the must, like I've met you and I walk into a room and I say, does anybody, I'm a shameless networker. When I check in at the registration table, I ask people at the registration table, like, who should I meet in this room today? Or do you know anybody in this room who does this? Or is anybody here from this company? Because the people at the registration table might help you if you ask. I also talk about things like Periscope Vision. Who do you need to know? Because they're going to tell you, they're going to be able to see what's coming up in business. And so I talk about networking from an executive point of view. And I actually have a chart in it about different areas of business knowledge. So I said, you don't have to be an expert on everything. But if you don't know social media and you think you need to know social media, then you need to find a social media marketer in your network so that when you need to know it, you know somebody. Like if you don't need to know how to conduct an audit, but you need a friend that knows what an audit is, so that if you have to deal with it in business, you can go tap them on the shoulder. So I've got a grid that you can write your skill of, this is how much I know in this area, or you can write a name of who you know that knows it in the area. I think people get blocked a lot in their career because they don't know how to make a business budget. I've seen so many people get blocked in their career because they don't know money. And so you need to know somebody who can help you make your business budget for your department, or just understand it. So anyway, it's kind of on that. Like I can give you basic networking tips when you walk in a room. You know, like when you walk in a room and you feel alone, always walk up to a group of 3. Never walk up to a group of 2, because 2 people are talking to each other and they're not going to talk to you. But if you walk in and you walk to a group of 3, there's always somebody that's not talking. And so I can give you that kind of advice, but this book is more about accelerating your career opportunities by the way you choose to look at networking.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Allison. We are mindful of the time, and unfortunately, as you always say, you know, all good things must come to an end. So yes, we were in conversation with Allison Summers. Allison, thank you very much for carving out a moment in time from your undoubtedly busy schedule. For those who've stayed with us, Allison Summers is a global business leader, host of the podcast Disruptive CEO Nation. She's an author and a speaker, a champion for nonprofits and women in business. So once again, Allison, thank you very much. It was a thrilling ride. What a story, certainly an amazing one to take away with pure inspiration. To our audience, thank you very much for staying tuned, and I hope you've enjoyed this segment as much as we did. On that note, I'd like to thank our partners in technology, H1, for staying with us through to season 3 and leaving everyone to enjoy the rest of the day. As I say, stay safe, stay productive.